The clinking of silverware against china hushed as Mark, my husband of 12 years, raised his glass. We were gathered at his mother's dining room table, a long mahogany beast set with polished candlesticks and crystal goblets, the kind of table that looked like it belonged in a museum instead of a house in suburban Colorado. I was halfway through cutting into a slice of roast beef when his voice, rich with satisfaction, cut the air like a blade. "I sold Catherine's luxury cabin," he declared, pausing for dramatic effect, "for $60,000. My knife slipped the meat, tearing ragged under my fork. For a second, I thought I had misheard him. But then the room erupted, not in outrage, not in shock, but in cheers. His mother Eleanor clapped her wrinkled hands together, as if he'd just announced a pregnancy. His sister Linda squealed, eyes gleaming with delight. Even Linda's husband gave a sharp whistle, as though Mark had just scored the winning touchdown. The only sound missing was my own voice, lodged somewhere between disbelief and rage. I felt the blood drain from my face, as though the earth itself had tilted, leaving me dangling above an abyss. I could hear the laughter, the smug congratulations, the way Linda leaned across the table and crowed, "Smart move, Mark 60, grand, easy cash. Finally, that old place is going to be useful. My old place, my sanctuary, my father's legacy." I looked around the table, searching desperately for one pair of eyes that mirrored my horror, but all I found were smirks and giddy smiles. My hand trembled around my wine glass until it slipped from my fingers, crashing onto the white linen tablecloth, staining it crimson. The laughter faltered for only a heartbeat. Eleanor leaned in, wagging a finger. "Now, Catherine, don't be dramatic. It's just a cabin. Mark did what needed to be done. You should thank him." Her words were gasoline to the fire already roaring in my chest. Just a cabin. That cabin was where my father, a man who had served 20 years in the army, had built a fireplace stone by stone. It was where we huddled during blizzards, where I learned to fish in the icy stream out back, where I scattered his ashes beneath the pines when cancer stole him from me. That cabin wasn't just wood and mortar. It was my father's voice, echoing in the creak of the stairs, his steady hand guiding mine as we painted the shutters his promise. "This place will always be yours." Katie burned into every plank. My pulse thundered in my ears as I stared at Mark. His face glowed with the smug pride of a man who believed he had just executed a masterstroke. He swirled his wine casually, enjoying the moment. "It was sitting empty," he said smoothly, "and we needed the money. 60,000 is a great deal. I handled it." He said it like a favor, as though he had rescued me from some imaginary burden. My mouth finally unsealed words, clawing their way out. "You what?" My voice shook a tremor, caught between fury and disbelief. "You sold my cabin, without asking me, without my consent." He smirked, sipping his wine. "As your husband, I have every right to manage finances. It was wasted space. Don't act like you ever use it." Linda chimed in, laughing. "She doesn't get it, Mark. She doesn't know how to make smart financial moves. You did the right thing. Now we can all benefit." The room spun. I clutched the edge of the table to keep from tipping sideways as realization slammed into me. They weren't just bystanders. They were co-conspirators, cheering for my loss, celebrating my humiliation. My stomach twisted as if I'd swallowed glass. I saw flashes in my mind. The last snowfall at the cabin, the crackle of firewood, the photo of my father on the mantel, and the image warped, replaced with Linda, redecorating Eleanor, sitting smugly by the window, Mark handing over keys, as if he were gifting a toy. I pushed back my chair, the screech of wood against tile, piercing the room. That cabin was mine, I said, my voice low, but shaking with rage. Bought with my money, paid for with my years. It was never yours to sell. Eleanor's lips curled into a patronizing smile. Oh, Catherine, stop making a scene. Family sacrifices for family. Mark did what you couldn't. Be grateful, grateful. The word ricocheted through my skull, a cruel echo of every time I had been told to smile, to sacrifice, to be the good wife. Heat rose in my throat until I thought I would choke. The betrayal wasn't just Mark's. It was all of them sitting there, basking in my stolen peace, clinking glasses over the ashes of my father's gift. I could feel my nails digging into my palms, the sting grounding me. As I forced myself to breathe, my voice dropped quiet and sharp as broken glass. You've made a mistake, a very big mistake. For the first time, all night, the laughter died completely. The air thickened. Mark's grin faltered just slightly, as if a shadow had passed across his face. Linda shifted uncomfortably. Eleanor frowned. They had expected me to collapse, to cry, to beg. Instead, they saw the first flicker of something else resolve. I straightened my shoulders, lifting my chin, the silence pressing heavy as a storm about to break. I didn't have the evidence yet. I didn't even know how deep this betrayal ran. But in that moment, with my heart pounding and my father's promise echoing in my ears, I knew one thing with a clarity so sharp, it cut through the fog they had underestimated me. And that would be their downfall. Before the night of that dinner, before Mark's smug declaration, in the echo of glasses clinking, in celebration of my betrayal, life had taken on a routine that almost convinced me I was safe. We lived in a neat 2-story house on the outskirts of Denver beige siding, and a white picket fence that looked from the outside like the picture of stability. I was 38, a professor of American history at the university, the kind of job that kept me surrounded by books and eager young minds, a job that paid steadily, but never extravagantly. Mark, 42, worked in real estate, though in recent years, his deals had become fewer and his excuses more polished. To the outside world, we were ordinary. I drove my 10-year-old Subaru, kept my hair tied back in a practical bun most days, and graded papers late into the night. Mark liked to entertain, to boast about his business sense, and his family, his mother Eleanor, with her sharp tongue, his sister Linda, with her endless need for attention, fed off every word he spoke. Whenever we gathered at their home, I felt like an intruder, tolerated, but never truly accepted. Eleanor would pat my hand and say things like, "We know you do your best," dear, her voice dripping with condescension. Linda once called me the academic, not the achiever, because in their world, achievement was measured by how loudly you flaunted wealth. Still, I tried to keep the peace. I brought casseroles to family dinners, remembered birthdays, sent flowers on holidays. I told myself that enduring their little cruelties was part of being married, part of belonging. Mark would dismiss my concerns with a smirk, saying, "That's just how my family is. Don't take it so seriously." But each time the words lodged, like splinters, under my skin. The one thing that made it bearable was the cabin. Nestled in the Rockies, 2 hours from Denver, it was the one place that belonged only to me. I bought it after my father died, using the money I had saved since my first teaching job. My father had been a man of quiet strength, a veteran who built more with his hands than he ever said with words. The cabin had been our refuge when I was a child, a place of campfires and long hikes, of learning how to stand firm against the biting mountain wind. Buying it back after years of saving wasn't just a financial decision. It was a promise to myself that I would keep his memory alive. Whenever Eleanor's comments cut too deep, whenever Mark mocked my modest salary or laughed at the way I still clipped coupons, I would drive to the cabin. The gravel road, the sharp scent of pine, the way the fireplace roared to life when I stacked wood inside it, reminded me that I was more than their ridicule. I was strong, independent, capable of creating a home that was mine alone. Mark never understood. He called it your little shack in the mountains and insisted it was impractical. Why pour money into a place you hardly visit? He'd ask, his voice laced with disdain. When I tried to explain that it wasn't about money, that it was about memory and peace, he would roll his eyes. You're sentimental to a fault. One day, you'll thank me for helping you let go. Those words should have been a warning, but I brushed them aside. I thought he meant them as careless remarks, not a plan. I convinced myself he was just frustrated, embarrassed that his business had slowed while my career remained steady. I ignored the way Linda's eyes lit up whenever the cabin was mentioned, the way Eleanor would sigh and say, "It's wasted space, Catherine. Family assets should be shared." I thought if I worked harder, if I played the role of dutiful wife and daughter-in-law, I could keep the peace. But peace built on silence is nothing more than a fragile mask. And that night at the dinner table, with Mark's announcement hanging in the air, and their laughter ringing in my ears, the mask shattered into pieces. I could never glue back together. The first crack in the mask had shown weeks before the dinner. I had been in my study late one night, grading papers, when I noticed Mark's voice, carrying from the downstairs office. It wasn't unusual for him to take late calls, but this time, the tone was different, sharper, hurried, almost pleading. I crept halfway down the stairs, barefoot, on the carpet, and paused in the dark. "She won't even notice," he whispered harshly. A pause, then his chuckle, low and smug. "Trust me, Linda, she's sentimental, but naive. By the time she realizes, the deal will be done." My stomach turned cold. I stepped back up the stairs. Before he could see me, heart hammering. He was talking about me, about something I hadn't agreed to, about the one place he knew I would notice. The next morning, I asked him casually, over coffee, "Who were you on the phone with last night?" He looked up from his phone, not even pretending to hide his irritation. "Work. Don't pry." He kissed the top of my head, as if the gesture could erase the suspicion, and left before I could push further. I told myself, maybe I had misunderstood, maybe it was just stress talking. But the words lingered sharp and sour. She's sentimental, but naive. A week later, I drove up to the cabin for the first snowfall. The tires crunched over the frozen gravel, the pines dusted white, the stream already stiffening into ice. Inside, everything was as I had left it. Blankets folded over the arm of the couch, the photograph of my father on the mantel, his kind eyes steady, even in black and white. I lit a fire and sat with a mug of coffee, listening to the crackle of wood and the distant call of a raven. For a few hours, I let myself believe everything was fine, that the cabin was safe, that I was safe. But even then, I felt the weight of something pressing in. Mark had been distant for months, his jokes sharper, his patience thinner. He mocked me when I clipped coupons, sneered when I spent weekends at the cabin instead of with his family. "It's like you're married to that house instead of me," he had said once. Bitterness leaking through every word. I thought it was jealousy. I never realized it was preparation. The breaking point came 2 days before the dinner. I found an envelope tucked in the drawer of our desk at home. It wasn't addressed to me, but curiosity gnawed until I pulled it open. Inside was a copy of a contract, escrow, documents, property transfer forms, with my name typed neatly on the seller's line. My name. But the signature scrawled at the bottom wasn't mine. My chest constricted, air catching in my throat. I ran my fingers over the ink bile rising as I recognized the clumsy attempt at my handwriting. My knees buckled, and I sat hard on the edge of the bed, the paper trembling in my hands. The door creaked open, and Mark appeared, his expression shifting from surprise to annoyance in seconds. "You went through my things," he snapped. I held up the papers, my voice trembling. "What is this?" His eyes narrowed, then softened with practice charm. "You're overreacting. It's nothing finalized. Just business. Business." My voice cracked. "This is my cabin. My signature." He stepped closer, his hand brushing over mine, attempting to disarm me. "Catherine, relax. I'm handling it. It's not like you use the place often. Think of what 60,000 can do for us. For family. Family." The words seared my ears like acid. He didn't mean us. He meant them, Eleanor, Linda, everyone who had always seen me as less. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to Mark's even breathing beside me. I thought of calling the police, of confronting him with the papers. But something in me hesitated. Fear, maybe. Or the tiny, battered part of me that still wanted to believe he wouldn't betray me so deeply. But when he stood at that dinner table, wine glass raised, and declared with pride that he had sold my cabin, the hesitation died. The truth was no longer whispered in late-night calls or hidden in desk drawers. It was spoken aloud, bold and cruel, with laughter to punctuate it. And, in that moment, any illusions I had left turned to ash. The silence after my words at the dinner table felt like a canyon. Mark leaned back in his chair, completely at ease, as if he'd just announced a clever business move that would earn him applause for years to come. "Don't overreact, Catherine," he said smoothly, his voice dripping with condescension. "I handled it like a man should. You should be thanking me. That cabin was nothing more than a financial sinkhole." Eleanor's sharp voice followed quickly, cutting across the table like a whip. "Yes? Catherine, don't embarrass yourself in front of family. Mark has responsibilities you'll never understand. He's keeping this family afloat. Stop being so ungrateful." Ungrateful. The word stung like a slap. I clenched my fists beneath the table, my nails biting crescents into my palms. I forced myself to meet Eleanor's cold eyes. "Ungrateful," I said slowly, my voice trembling with rage. "That cabin was mine. Bought with my money, with my father's blessing. You had no part in it." Linda rolled her eyes, tossing her blonde hair over her shoulder with exaggerated disdain. "Oh, please. Always dragging your dad into this. He's gone, Catherine. Let it go. You don't need some empty shack to prove you had a daddy who loved you." The cruelty in her words landed like a knife between my ribs, twisting in the most vulnerable part of me. My breath caught, but I forced myself to hold steady. I wasn't going to give them tears. Not here. Not tonight. I reached across the table, fingers brushing against the envelope Mark had smugly tossed beside his plate like a party trick. He didn't stop me. He wanted me to see it. My hands trembled as I pulled out the papers, the legalese, sprawling across the page, my name scrawled at the bottom in handwriting that mimicked mine. but lacked the precision of years of grading essays. My chest tightened. "This is forgery," I whispered, barely able to find my voice. Mark chuckled, sipping his wine. "No one cares, Catherine. Husbands and wives sign for each other all the time. You think the state will waste time over a signature? Grow up." The laughter returned, rippling around the table like a chorus of hyenas. I felt myself shrinking under their gaze, small and foolish, until a sudden surge of anger pulled me upright. I slammed the papers down onto the table so hard the crystal glasses rattled. "You had no right." I spat my voice louder, now edged with steel. "You forged my name. You sold my father's cabin behind my back, and you will regret this." The words hung there sharp and unyielding. For the first time, the room shifted. Linda stopped laughing, her smile faltering just a fraction. Eleanor's eyes narrowed, assessing me with a flicker of something colder, fear maybe, or calculation. Mark, though, only smirked, leaning forward as if savoring my defiance. "Don't play lawyer, Catherine," he said with a sneer. "You're a history professor, not someone who understands the real world. I've seen your paychecks. You're lucky I married you. Without me, you'd still be clipping coupons to buy ramen. So don't lecture me on finances. I saved you." The gaslighting pressed down on me, thick and suffocating. Saved me, as if he hadn't just gutted the one piece of security I had in this world. As if the years of sacrifices I had made, the dinners, cooked, the endless tolerance of his family's cruelty, meant nothing. I stared at the forged signature again, my breath steadying. I remembered my father's last words in the hospital, his rough hand squeezing mine. "Protect what's yours, Katie. Don't let anyone take it from you." The rage inside me sharpened into clarity. They thought I was beaten. They thought I was too weak, too sentimental, too naive. But they had forgotten something. I wasn't just my father's daughter. I was a woman who had clawed her way through graduate school, who had worked 2 jobs to pay down debt, who had bought that cabin brick by brick with years of sweat. And now, as I sat across from a table of people drunk on their own malice, I knew one thing with certainty: I would not let them win. That night, long after the dinner plates had been cleared and the hollow laughter of Mark's family had faded into silence, I lay awake in our bed, staring at the ceiling. The papers with my forged signature burned in my mind. My chest felt heavy, as if the walls themselves were pressing in. Mark slept beside me, his steady breathing betraying not the faintest hint of guilt, as though he hadn't just gutted the core of who I was. In the darkness, my thoughts pulled me backward to the cabin and to my father. I was 12, the first time he took me there, after my mother left us. The drive had been long, winding through mountain roads, the sun bleeding orange across the horizon. When we finally pulled up, the cabin looked weathered but proud, its stone chimney standing tall against the backdrop of towering pines. My father had smiled, then his broad hand resting on my shoulder. "This is where we'll start over, Katie. Just you and me." I remember the smell of pine needles, crushed underfoot, the sharp bite of cold air that rushed in every time we opened the door. Inside, the floors creaked, but the fire roared, and I watched him kneel to lay logs with a care that seemed almost ceremonial. That night, wrapped in a blanket beside the fire, he told me homes aren't about size or money. They're about the memories you build inside. One day, this will be yours. It became our sanctuary. Winters were spent snowshoeing through the woods, my father's laughter echoing in the stillness as he showed me how to follow animal tracks. Summers were filled with fishing at the stream out back, his strong hands guiding mine as I cast the line, patient even when I tangled it again and again. When I turned 18, He carved my initials into the banister, by the stairs, sealing a promise. This cabin belonged to us, to me, forever. The last memory is the hardest. I was 27 when cancer finally hollowed him out, when the man who had always seemed larger than life lay frail in a hospital bed. The beeping of machines was constant, the antiseptic smell suffocating. He reached for my hand, his grip weak, but his eyes steady. "Promise me, Katie," he whispered, his voice raspy. "Promise me you'll keep the cabin safe. It's more than wood. It's your roots. It's proof you're strong enough to stand, no matter what comes." I promised. I held his hand until it went cold. When he was gone, I worked harder than I ever thought possible. Teaching summer courses, tutoring, scrimping every penny until I could buy the cabin outright, reclaiming it from the market before strangers could take it. Signing those papers had felt like signing a pact with him that his legacy was safe in my hands. And now Mark had taken it, reduced my father's life's work to $60,000 and a smug toast. I could still hear Linda's words at the dinner table. "He's gone. Catherine, let it go." The cruelty of it made bile rise in my throat. How dare she dismiss him, dismiss me, dismiss everything that place represented? Tears pricked my eyes, but I forced them back. My father wouldn't want me to cry in the dark, helpless. He would want me to fight. His voice echoed steady and unwavering, as if carried through the years by the crackle of the cabin's fire. "Protect what's yours. Don't let anyone take it." I turned on my side, staring at Mark's sleeping face. He looked peaceful, lips parted completely, oblivious to the storm brewing beside him. He thought he had won. He thought I would fold. That sentiment would keep me weak. But he didn't understand that sentiment tied to blood and memory could be the strongest weapon of all. As I closed my eyes, I saw the cabin again, the stone fireplace, the initials carved into the banister, the pine trees whispering against the night sky. My father's legacy, my safe place, my promise. I swore, then, with the quiet ferocity of a woman who has nothing left to lose, that I would not break my word. The cabin would be mine again, and those who had tried to steal it from me would pay. By morning, the weight in my chest had hardened into something sharp, something that cut through the fog of disbelief. I woke before dawn, pulled on a sweater, and slipped quietly out of the house. Mark was still asleep, sprawled across the bed, like a man without a care in the world. I couldn't bear to look at him. The forged papers from dinner sat folded in my purse, each page screaming betrayal louder than words ever could. I drove straight to the small office, tucked in a brick building downtown, the place where my father's old attorney still practiced. Denise Carter had been a friend of his, a woman in her 50s with iron gray hair and eyes like steel. She had drafted the original purchase contract when I bought the cabin. When I walked in, Denise looked up from her desk, surprise flickering across her face. "Catherine, it's been years. What's wrong?" I laid the papers in front of her, without a word. My hands shook, but my voice was steady. "My husband sold my cabin. He forged my name." She adjusted her glasses and scanned the pages, her brows knitting tighter with each line. Finally, she exhaled a sharp, controlled sound. "This is fraud, plain and simple. He had no legal authority. Your name is on the deed alone. Catherine, this is a crime." The words landed with both relief and terror. A crime, not just betrayal, not just cruelty, something the law could see, could punish. Denise leaned forward. "Listen carefully. We need to act quickly. If escrow hasn't closed yet, We can file to void the transaction. I'll prepare a cease and desist letter today. And Catherine, don't confront him again. Let me handle the legal side. He'll try to manipulate you, make you doubt what you know. Don't let him. Manipulate. The word hit me like a bell tolling. That was exactly what Mark had been doing for years, twisting reality, until I questioned myself. No more. From Denise's office, I drove to the local police department. My stomach churned as I explained to the officer at the front desk, sliding the forged papers across the counter. My voice shook, but I forced myself to say it. This is my husband's handwriting. This is my property. He sold it without my consent. The officer nodded grimly, filing a report. We'll pass this to the Property Crimes Division. Fraud involving real estate is serious. You did the right thing coming in. The words steadied me. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't overreacting. This wasn't just a cabin. It was a felony. As I left the station, my phone buzzed. A message from Leah, my best friend since college. The only person outside that toxic circle who knew the truth about Mark's family. Hey, how was dinner last night? I stared at the screen for a long moment before replying. He sold the cabin, forged my signature. I need help. Her response came instantly. I'll be at your house in 10. Don't talk to him until I get there. Back in my driveway, I sat, gripping the steering wheel, staring at the house that now felt like a cage. The curtains in the upstairs bedroom shifted. Mark was awake. A surge of dread threatened to choke me. But then I remembered Denise's words. Don't confront him. Let the law handle this. When Leah pulled up, she marched to my car without hesitation, her red hair blazing in the morning sun. Let me see the papers, she demanded. She flipped through them, her journalist's eyes sharp. He's sloppy. Dates don't line up, your signature's wrong. Even the witness field is blank. Catherine, this is enough to bury him. Her certainty bolstered me. For the first time since Mark's smug toast, I felt the ground steady beneath my feet. I wasn't alone. I had allies, and I had the law. I looked back at the house, where Mark was surely pacing, already rehearsing his excuses. A cold calm washed over me. He thought he had stolen my sanctuary, but he hadn't counted on the one thing stronger than his lies, the truth. And now, the truth had teeth. 2 days later, Denise filed the cease and desist order, and the transaction on my cabin froze like a bird mid-flight. I should have felt relief, but the war wasn't over. Word traveled faster than wildfire in Mark's family. By the time I arrived at Eleanor's house that Sunday, they were waiting for me, Mark pacing near the window, Eleanor perched like a queen in her armchair, Linda sprawled across the sofa, with a glass of Chardonnay in hand. The atmosphere was electric heavy, with anticipation, like they expected me to crawl in on my knees. I stood in the doorway, my pulse pounding every nerve, screaming at me to turn back. But I stepped inside, clutching my father's old leather folder, where Denise had slipped extra copies of the legal papers. I would not leave without making my stand. Eleanor was the first to speak, her voice sugar-coated and poisonous. Catherine, dear, you've caused quite a fuss, dragging police into family matters, filing orders. Honestly, you're making a spectacle of yourself. I met her gaze, cold and unflinching. Family matters. Forgery is a crime, Eleanor. Selling property that isn't yours is a crime. Mark didn't just embarrass me, he broke the law. Mark stepped forward, his jaw tight, but his smile practiced. Katie, stop this. You're blowing things out of proportion. I did it for us. $60,000 cash. Think about the debts we could pay, the vacations we could take. Vacations for who I snapped. For your sister. For your mother. Don't pretend this was about us. You sold my father's cabin to line their pockets. Linda slammed her glass down, wine splashing onto the carpet. Oh, get over yourself. That place was a waste, just sitting there, empty while the rest of us could use it. You think clinging to some old cabin makes you special? It's pathetic. Her words sliced, but this time I didn't flinch. Instead, I pulled the papers from my folder and dropped them onto the coffee table with a sharp slap. Do you see this? I demanded, my voice rising. This is a criminal investigation. The police know. The courts know. And soon, everyone else will know too. You can laugh at me all you want, but you won't laugh in front of a judge. The room stilled. Eleanor's smile faltered, lines tightening around her mouth. Mark's face flushed red, his confidence cracking. Linda, ever brazen, tried to recover with a scoff. You wouldn't dare take this to court. You'd shame your own husband, your family. I took a step closer, my eyes locked on hers. Family doesn't steal from me. Family doesn't forge my name. And family doesn't cheer, while my father's legacy is sold for pennies. If this is what you call family, then I want no part of it. For the first time, Eleanor's mask slipped. Her voice hardened brittle with fury. If you go through with this, Catherine, you'll be cut off. Don't expect our support. Don't expect a place at this table again. The threat landed like a door slamming shut. But instead of fear, I felt a strange lightness. I realized then that I had never truly had a place at their table. I had been a placeholder, a convenience, someone to sneer at when they needed to feel superior. Losing their approval meant losing nothing at all. I straightened, slipping the folder back under my arm. My voice was steady, cool. Good, because I don't want your table. I have my own, and soon I'll have my cabin back too. Without waiting for a reply, I turned on my heel and walked out. Behind me, I heard Eleanor's hiss, Linda's scoff, and Mark's low growl of frustration. But I didn't look back. For the first time in years, I wasn't the one shrinking under their weight. They were the ones rattled, their false certainty beginning to crumble. As I stepped into the crisp afternoon air, I felt my father's words stirring again in my chest. Protect what's yours. And I knew with unshakable clarity that I was finally doing exactly that. Leah spread the papers across her kitchen table, the wood surface already covered with her laptop, a legal pad scrawled with notes, and 2 mugs of coffee gone cold. She had that look she always wore when chasing down a lead, for the paper-sharp, relentless eyes blazing with focus. All right, she said, tapping a pen against the forged deed. We need to build this piece by piece. Fraud cases don't hinge on feelings, Catherine. They hinge on evidence. And lucky for you, Mark is arrogant enough to leave trails. I sat across from her, exhaustion pulling at my bones, but I forced myself to lean in. This wasn't the time to wilt. What do we have so far? I asked. She clicked open her laptop, scrolling through files she'd already begun compiling. First, the documents themselves. Denise confirmed the signature is fraudulent, and the notary line is blank. That alone screams invalid. But we need more. She pulled out her phone. So I reached out to a contact at the county clerk's office. Guess what? Mark filed preliminary paperwork 2 weeks ago, using his business license as leverage. He listed you as a cosigner. Except legally, you're not on any of his business documents. My stomach twisted. So he dragged me into his failing real estate scheme. Leah nodded grimly. Exactly. That's motive right there. He's drowning in debt, Catherine. This wasn't about family sacrifices. It was about saving his own skin. She slid another folder toward me. And then there are the messages. I flipped through printed screenshots Leah had somehow coaxed from a mutual acquaintance of Linda's, a chain of texts between Mark and Linda. My pulse spiked as I read. Mark, once the sale clears, you'll get your cut. Just don't tell Catherine yet. Linda, she'll find out eventually. Mark, by then it won't matter. 60 grand is already ours. The words blurred as hot fury surged through me. I pressed my palms flat against the table to steady myself. They planned it together, I whispered. Leah's jaw tightened. This wasn't just betrayal, Catherine. It was conspiracy. He and Linda worked hand in hand to strip you of what's yours. The law takes that seriously. She pulled another sheet from her notebook. I also checked with the escrow officer listed on the draft contract. He remembers Mark, but guess what? He never met you. Mark told him you were too busy to attend the signing. That's more evidence he knowingly misrepresented you. The room swam with details, each one another nail in the coffin Mark had built for himself. For a moment, the weight of it all pressed down on me. But then through the chaos of papers and screenshots, I saw the pattern forming a truth undeniable and sharp as glass. They thought they were clever, but they were careless. They thought I would cower, but I was standing. Leah looked up, her expression softening. I know it feels overwhelming, but Catherine, this is good. Every scrap of arrogance they left behind is fuel for us. Denise will shred them in court. You just have to hold steady. I nodded, gripping the folder tighter. I will. She leaned back, folding her arms. You need to remember something. Evidence never blinks. People lie. People twist the truth. But paper messages, signatures, they don't flinch. You've got them cornered. The phrase stuck in my head like a drumbeat. Evidence never blinks. That night, back at my own dining table, I spread the files out again, this time with Denise on speakerphone. She walked me through each item, her voice calm and precise. These texts are gold. The escrow officer's testimony will hold up, and the forged signature open and shut. Catherine, you have everything you need. As I listened, a steady fire grew in my chest. For so long, I had lived under the weight of Mark's dismissals, Eleanor's sneers, Linda's mockery. But now, with every piece of evidence stacked before me, I could see it clearly. Their power had always been an illusion. They had relied on my silence, my willingness to endure. But I wasn't silent anymore. I gathered the papers back into the folder, holding it close to my chest like armor. The next time I faced them, it wouldn't be at their table, under their laughter. It would be in a courtroom, under the eyes of a judge. And this time, I would not be the one humiliated. The courthouse smelled of old paper and disinfectant, the kind of sterile air that carries the weight of decisions, capable of changing lives. I stood outside the oak-paneled courtroom, clutching Denise's arm for a moment before we walked in. My heart thudded so hard, I could feel it in my throat, but my steps were steady. Leah sat in the front row, already her notebook open, eyes sharp and unwavering. She gave me a nod, silent solidarity. Inside, the room buzzed with low chatter until the bailiff called for order. Mark sat at the defendant's table, dressed in a navy suit he hadn't worn since his cousin's wedding. He still wore that smirk, the one I had come to know so well, the one that said he believed charm could carry him through anything. Linda sat directly behind him, arms crossed, her lips curled into a smug smile, while Eleanor leaned heavily on her cane, glaring at me, as though I had dragged their family name through the mud. The judge, a stern woman with silver hair tied into a bun, took her seat. This court will hear the matter of property fraud concerning the sale of the Miller cabin. Her voice echoed across the room, crisp and commanding. Denise rose, First, her presence commanding her words precise. Your Honor, my client, Catherine Miller, is the sole legal owner of the property in question. Her husband, without authorization, forged her signature, misrepresented her consent, and attempted to sell the cabin for personal and familial gain. We have substantial evidence of fraud, conspiracy, and misrepresentation. Mark's attorney, a thin, nervous man who looked as if he had been hired in haste, scrambled to his feet. Your Honor, the defense asserts that Mr. Miller acted in good faith. He believed he had the right as a husband to manage family assets, and any discrepancies in paperwork are misunderstandings, not criminal intent. The judge's eyes narrowed. We shall see. Denise began laying out the evidence piece by piece. First, the deed showing my sole ownership. Then, the forged contract, the signature compared to authentic samples of mine, the glaring inconsistencies circled in red. The courtroom shifted as murmurs rippled through the spectators. Next came the escrow officer, testifying under oath. I never met Mrs. Miller. Mr. Miller told me she was too busy. He assured me he had full authority to sign on her behalf. Then, Leah stepped forward, her voice clear, reading aloud the printed texts between Mark and Linda. Once the sale clears, you'll get your cut. Just don't tell Catherine yet. The words hung in the air like poison, undeniable, incriminating. I glanced at Mark. His smirk faltered just slightly. Linda squirmed in her seat, her cheeks flushing as whispers spread through the gallery. Denise pressed on. Your Honor, this was not a mistake. It was a calculated conspiracy. Mr. Miller and his sister schemed to strip my client of her property, to erase her father's legacy for a mere $60,000. The defense attorney stammered, fumbling for excuses. Your Honor, these texts out of context, they could mean anything. Perhaps my client was exaggerating. Perhaps. The judge cut him off sharply. Enough. The evidence speaks clearly. It was then that Denise nodded to me. My turn. My legs felt heavy as I walked to the stand. But when I faced the courtroom, something inside me shifted. I thought of my father, of the cabin, of the fire that had always burned there. My voice trembled at first, but then grew stronger. I promised my father I would protect that cabin, I said, staring directly at Mark. It's not just wood and stone. It's the place where he taught me to stand strong, where his ashes rest beneath the pines. Mark knew what it meant to me, and still he sold it. He looked me in the eye and he laughed. This isn't about money. This is about betrayal, about erasing my history, my family, my peace. And I will not let him or anyone take that from me. The courtroom was silent when I finished, the weight of my words pressing into every corner. Mark shifted uncomfortably, his smugness dissolving under the judge's steady gaze. Finally, Mark was called to testify. He strode to the stand with forced confidence, a tempting charm. Your Honor, Catherine's exaggerating. I never meant to hurt her. I just thought it was sitting empty. I was trying to help. Denise pounced. Help. By forging her name, by conspiring with your sister, by pocketing $60,000 behind her back. Mark's face reddened. It wasn't like that. Denise slid the texts across to the judge, her voice razor sharp. Then, what did you mean by, once the sale clears, you'll get your cut? Mark opened his mouth, but no words came. His hands clenched on the edge of the stand, his eyes darting to Linda, who suddenly found the floor fascinating. The silence was louder than any confession. The judge's gavel struck once. I have heard enough. The evidence is overwhelming. This was fraud. This was conspiracy. And it will be punished as such. Mark sagged back into his seat, his face drained of color. Eleanor shook her head furiously, whispering something venomous into his ear. while Linda's smug smile had vanished entirely, replaced by a pale mask of fear. For the first time in years, I felt taller than all of them. The gavel's echo still hung in the air when the judge leaned forward, her eyes sharp and unyielding. This court finds that Mark Miller, with the aid of Linda Foster, conspired to commit fraud through the falsification of legal documents, forged signatures, and attempted misrepresentation of property ownership. The evidence is clear, and this court will not overlook such deliberate violations of law. The room seemed to hold its breath. Mark shifted in his seat, his hands gripping the table so hard his knuckles blanched white. Linda's face drained of color, her perfect manicure trembling against the armrest. Eleanor muttered under her breath, her lips pursed tight, but even she couldn't disguise the unease creeping across her face. The judge's voice rang steady, striking like a hammer. The attempted sale of the cabin is hereby declared null and void. The property remains in the sole and legal possession of Catherine Miller. Furthermore, due to the fraudulent intent demonstrated, this court orders a full investigation into Mr. Miller's financial dealings, including potential wire fraud and conspiracy charges. Preliminary findings indicate debts hidden from his spouse, misuse of his business license, and collusion with family members to profit unlawfully. The defense attorney stumbled to his feet. Your Honor, surely incarceration is... The judge silenced him with a glance. Mr. Miller, your actions were not careless mistakes. They were calculated betrayals committed against your wife and against the law. You used the sanctity of marriage as a shield while conspiring to erase her rights. Such conduct is reprehensible. She turned toward Linda. And Ms. Foster, your participation in these actions does not escape this court's notice. Encouraging and benefiting from fraud is complicity. You will face charges of conspiracy and attempted fraudulent gain. Custody of your minor child will be reviewed by family court, given your demonstrated disregard for lawful behavior. A gasp rippled through the room. Linda's mouth fell open, words stumbling out. No, you can't do that. I'm a mother. This was Mark's idea. The judge's gavel struck once. Silence. Both of you acted knowingly. Both of you will be held accountable. I sat frozen, my heart thudding, the words washing over me like a tide I had waited years to see rise. Justice wasn't abstract anymore. It was here spoken aloud, carved into the record for all to hear. The judge continued. Pending the criminal investigation, Mr. Miller, you are to relinquish access to all joint accounts held with Mrs. Miller. A protective order will be issued preventing the sale or transfer of any of her assets without explicit consent. You will appear for arraignment on fraud charges within 30 days. Bail is set, but this court will recommend a thorough audit of your financial practices. Ms. Foster, your arraignment will be scheduled concurrently. The bailiff moved forward, collecting documents, the sound of footsteps reverberating across the polished floor. Mark slumped his head, falling into his hands, the weight of consequence pressing down at last. Linda whispered furiously to him, her words too sharp and fast to catch, but her face was stricken fear, finally cracking the shield of arrogance she wore so proudly. Eleanor, still seated stiffly, finally spoke, her voice brittle with outrage. This is a family matter. We could have settled this at home. The judge's glare was icy. Fraud is not a family matter, Mrs. Foster. Fraud is a crime. The finality of her words sealed the moment. I closed my eyes briefly, inhaling the gravity of it all. The cabin was safe. My father's promise had not been broken. And for the first time, Mark was stripped of his charm, his smirk replaced by the grim reality of accountability. When court adjourned, reporters surged forward, microphones flashing. Leah shielded me, guiding me past the chaos. But not before I caught sight of Mark, being led down the hall by his attorney. His shoulders slumped, Eleanor trailing behind like a shadow. Linda stormed off in the opposite direction, her phone already in her hand, no doubt preparing her defense to anyone who would listen. Outside, the Colorado sun blazed bright, the sky an endless stretch of blue. Denise stood beside me, her expression calm but firm. "This is only the beginning," she said. "He'll face real consequences now. You did the right thing." I swallowed hard, feeling the first true breath of freedom fill my lungs. He thought I wouldn't fight. He thought I'd fold. Leah slipped her arm around my shoulder, her voice fierce. "But you didn't. Evidence never blinks, Catherine. And neither did you." As we walked down the courthouse steps, the weight I'd carried for years seemed to lift piece by piece. Justice had spoken. And though the road ahead would still carry hearings and paperwork, though Mark and Linda would twist and thrash against the truth, I knew they had already lost. Because in that courtroom, for the first time, they were seen for what they really were: not family, not protectors, not people to be feared, but frauds. And frauds always fall. The house was quieter than I had ever known it to be. Mark had been released on bail, but the weight of the charges pressed down on him like chains, even without the cuffs. He no longer walked with the swagger that had once filled our home. Instead, he shuffled from room to room, phone in hand, his lawyer's voice a constant drone on the other end. The confidence, the smug laughter, it had all drained away. 3 days after the hearing, I found him sitting at the kitchen table, in the dim light, his head in his hands. Empty bottles of beer lined the counter, the smell sharp in the air. When he finally looked up at me, his eyes were bloodshot, his face hollow. "Catherine," he rasped, voice cracking in a way I had never heard before. "I didn't mean for it to get this far. I was desperate. I just thought, if I could get ahead, if I could fix things." His words dissolved into a choked sound. "I made a mistake. Please, you have to forgive me." I stood in the doorway, arms crossed over my chest. Once, that brokenness might have pierced me, might have stirred pity. But now all I felt was a steady, cold clarity. A mistake is forgetting an anniversary, Mark. A mistake is misplacing a bill, forging my name, selling my father's legacy, conspiring with your sister. That wasn't desperation. That was greed. He flinched his shoulders, caving, as if the truth itself had struck him. He reached across the table, but I didn't move closer. "I love you," he whispered. "We can get through this together. Don't let them tear us apart." I almost laughed. The audacity of it. You tore us apart the moment you decided your debts mattered more than my trust. The moment you laughed while your family cheered my humiliation. There's no we left to salvage. Behind me, the front door opened and shut. Eleanor's voice floated in sharp with indignation. She marched into the kitchen, her cane clicking against the tile. "Catherine, enough of this. You've made your point. Drop the charges. Think of Mark's reputation. Think of the family." I turned to her, slowly, my voice quiet, but edged with steel. "I thought of the family every time you dismissed me, every time you treated me like less. And what did it get me? Forged signatures and stolen memories. No, Eleanor. This time, I'm thinking of myself." Her eyes flashed with anger, but she said nothing. She turned on her heel and stormed out, her muttered curses trailing behind her. Later that night, my phone buzzed with a message from an unfamiliar number. It was Linda. "You don't understand. I was just trying to help Mark. I didn't think it would go this far." Please don't ruin my life. I stared at the screen for a long moment, bile rising in my throat. Ruin her life. She had tried to ruin mine. She had laughed in my face, mocked my father's memory. And now, when the walls closed in, she wanted mercy. I typed my reply slowly, deliberately. Choices have consequences, Linda. This is yours. And then I blocked her number. The next morning, I packed a bag. I couldn't stay in that house any longer. The walls reeked of betrayal, every room echoing with memories of gaslighting and contempt. Leah drove me up to the cabin, her hand squeezing mine as we turned onto the gravel road. Snow dusted the pines, the air crisp and biting. When the cabin came into view, my throat tightened, not with grief, but with relief. It was still mine. It was waiting. I stood in the doorway, looking at the initials carved into the banister, the fireplace my father built, the promise I had kept. Behind me, Leah whispered, "You did it." And for the first time in years, I believed her. The snow crunched beneath my boots as I stepped out onto the porch of the cabin. The mountains stretched wide and endless, their peaks glowing gold in the late afternoon light. The air was sharp, biting at my lungs, but it felt cleaner than any breath I had taken in months. Behind me, the cabin door creaked open, and Leah emerged, 2 steaming mugs in her hands. She handed me one and leaned against the railing, her fiery hair catching the sun. "You realize this is more than a victory, right?" she said softly. "It's a rebirth." I wrapped my hands among the mug, letting the warmth seep into my fingers. Inside the fireplace roared the crackle, echoing with my father's memory. For so long, the cabin had felt like a relic of what I had lost. Now standing here, it felt like the foundation of what I was building anew. Over the next weeks, I poured myself into restoring the cabin, not out of necessity, but out of love. I scrubbed the stone hearth until it gleamed, patched the old shutters, and strung twinkling lights along the beams. Each nail hammered, each brush of paint felt like stitching myself back together. I wasn't fixing a place, I was reclaiming myself. Leah came often, sometimes with wine, sometimes with books, sometimes with nothing but her company. We'd sit late into the night, talking about everything and nothing. She told me more than once, "You should do something with this place. Share it. Let other women who've been broken down by so-called family find their strength here." At first, I brushed it off, but the idea took root. I began drafting plans, small retreats, workshops, a safe haven for women who had endured gaslighting, betrayal, toxic families. I pictured them sitting by the fire, sipping coffee, as the mountains stood watch outside, realizing they weren't alone, realizing their stories mattered. The thought made my chest swell with a fierce pride. My father's legacy would no longer just be my shelter. It would be a sanctuary for others. Meanwhile, the fallout from court continued to ripple. Mark called once, leaving a message on my voicemail, his voice broken and desperate. "Catherine, please. I've lost everything. I don't know what to do. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." His words cracked, but they carried no weight anymore. I deleted the message without replying. Forgiveness maybe could come one day, but reconciliation never would. He had chosen his path, and the law would handle the rest. Linda's consequences struck harder than even she had anticipated. Family court had stripped her of partial custody until her charges were resolved. Friends who once orbited her fell away, unwilling to be tainted by scandal. I heard whispers, through neighbors, that she blamed me for ruining her life. But even those words felt hollow now. She had written her own downfall with every smug grin and every conspiratorial text. And Eleanor, she stayed silent. No calls, no visits. Perhaps she still seethed in her corner of the world, but her silence was its own surrender. The woman who once sneered, "Don't be dramatic," had nothing left to say. One evening, weeks after the judgment, I sat by the fireplace, Leah curled in an armchair across from me. The snow outside fell in thick, soft sheets, muffling the world into a cocoon of quiet. I pulled a thick journal from the shelf and wrote on the first page, in bold ink, "The Quiet Strength Project." Leah peered over my shoulder, her smile wide. "That's it. That's your legacy now." I closed the book gently, my heart steady. "No, it's ours. Every woman who steps into this cabin, who refuses to be silenced, who claims her life back, it's all of ours." For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't haunted by the need for approval, not from Mark, not from Eleanor, not from anyone who tried to belittle me. I felt free standing firmly in my own strength. The cabin hadn't just survived. It had been reborn, and so had I. I walked to the window, watching the snow settle on the pines, and whispered into the night, "Dad, I kept my promise. It's safe. I'm safe." The wind shifted, rattling the branches, carrying the sound of the crackling fire into the night sky. And in that moment, I believed he heard me. The next morning, I brewed coffee and stepped onto the porch as the sun rose. The mountains glowed with streaks of pink and gold. A new day spilling across the horizon. Behind me, Leah opened the door, her voice warm. "You ready to start?" I turned smiling, a strength in me that no one could ever take again. "Yes, let's begin." The cabin, once a symbol of what had been stolen, now stood as proof of what could be reclaimed. Justice had been delivered. Betrayal had been answered. And I, Catherine Miller, no longer lived in the shadow of other people's greed. I had my boundaries, my freedom, and my future. And I would never let anyone take them from me again.